Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Whitmore. I am the current director of the Break Exchange, and I'm so happy to welcome you to today's webinar. We're very excited that today's webinar is co-hosted by our partners at the Arch National Respite Network and Resource Center. So I'm going to give Jill Kagan an opportunity to just give her welcome and share a little bit about Arch.
Hello, everyone. We're very excited, as always, to co-host with the Break Exchange on these webinars that give us a chance to hear from our international colleagues. So thank you in advance, Maria, for your presentation. For those of you who are not familiar with Arch, we are a national training and technical assistance center that provides consultation, training, evaluation, research guidance. We maintain a national respite locator service for family caregivers and those who assist them to help them find respite and ways to pay for it in their communities. We have a policy division, the National Respite Coalition, that advocates for respite at the national level. And then our Lifespan Respite Technical Assistance Center, which is funded by the U.S. Administration for Community Living. And we are available to anyone and all of you who have any questions about respite, how to implement it, how to evaluate it, and welcome today to this webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill. So I'm going to just share a little bit about the Break Exchange for those of you that this may be your first webinar you've attended, or just a reminder for those who haven't been here in a while. The Break Exchange stands for Building Respite Evidence and Knowledge, and we are an international group of researchers, respite providers, agencies, and individuals who are really committed to building a culture of evidence-based respite care. The Break Exchange was founded in partnership with some amazing groups, Shared Care Scotland, Marquette University, where I work as an assistant professor in the College of Nursing and lead a program of research that is supporting family caregivers, the Arch National Respite Network, you just heard from Jill, and the International Short Break Association. And I have to just give a plug out to the International Short Break Association, or ISBA, to remind everyone that their international conference is coming up this fall. It's September 12th through 14th in Poland. So if you haven't had a chance to check that agenda out, please do. We're looking forward to seeing a lot of you in Poland. So there are many benefits of joining the Break Exchange if you're not already connected, and I'm going to just walk briefly through some of those. The first is the opportunity to connect with this great network of researchers, providers, agencies, and individuals. And we have multiple ways to do that. Attending our monthly networking hour, which is the second Monday of every month, is a great way to connect and meet other people and learn what's happening around the globe. We currently have close to 300 members from 18 countries in the exchange. So it's a really diverse group of individuals representing an even more diverse group of organizations that are all sharing that common interest of supporting respite research and evidence. You have an opportunity to learn about evidence-based practice and research that's happening around the world, and also share what you're doing. So if you're interested in sharing information about work you're doing, whether it's research or an innovative program or an evidence-based model that you're implementing, we have opportunities to highlight that in our e-newsletter that goes out once a month. We can share that on our website or social media, or you can even present a quarterly webinar like we're doing today. And the most important aspect of the Break Exchange, I feel, is the opportunity to collaborate with this great network. So if you are someone that is looking for evaluation or research partner, reach out to us and we can help connect you to someone who may be interested in supporting that, or vice versa. If you're a researcher or an evaluator and you're interested in connecting with a respite program or agency, this is a great opportunity to do so. So we really encourage you to leverage the exchange to help identify those potential partners. We do have a way to help promote that a little bit by allowing members to create a member profile, and you can actually search online the database of our member profile. So you can find out if there's people from your geographic region, or if you're interested in connecting with someone from a certain country who is involved with a certain type of respite. There's different ways you can search and sort that database to find potential partners in your work. So we encourage you to stay connected. Lots of ways to do that through our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can join our email list on our website and fill out that member profile, and always email us with any questions or things that you want to share. And we'll make sure to post those in the chat as well. So just a quick reminder to all of us that we are in this work helping to support family caregivers to take that time, that break, that much needed break from care to care for themselves. And we need to also practice that ourselves. So I love this quote that reminds us that self-care is giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you. And so my wish to you all always is that we are practicing what we preach and ensuring that we are well rested and supported in our work so we can help those who we are trying to help as well. So I'm going to stop my share, and I'm very delighted to introduce our webinar speaker today. And we're so happy to have Maria Caulfield here from Bangor University in Wales in the UK, sharing with us the evolution of dementia care's needs for and access to short breaks. And I will let her provide a little bit more introduction and share the results of her research study with all of you. Please feel free to post questions and comments in the chat. And at the end of her presentation, we'll open it up for live Q&A, which I'll moderate. So without further ado, Maria, feel free to share your screen and we'll get things started. Thanks so much for being here.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Kim. So I'll just share. So hopefully everyone can see my full screen. So like Kim said, I'll talk through the entirety of the presentation, and then I'll pause at the end and we'll have time for questions. So yeah, wonderful to be able to share with you some of the work we've been doing over the past few years here in Bangor University in North Wales. And what I'll be sharing with you today is one component, one study, which forms part of my PhD programme here at Bangor. And this work has been funded by the Welsh Government and in collaboration and support from my supervisors as Diane, Sean and Katrin. And this study in particular looks at understanding and exploring unpaid carers' short break needs, their experience of accessing breaks, and also outcomes over the caregiving career. I know in the States and in many other countries, the word respite is used, or I think it's pronounced respite, so it's a bit different. But increasingly in the UK countries, the term short break is appearing more and more in policy and practice. So for consistency, I'm going to keep with the term short break, and it refers to any form of service or assistance which enables unpaid carers to have sufficient and regular periods away from their responsibilities and their routines. So one outcome of which may be the experience of respite. And I think short breaks are quite a unique preventative intervention in that the main purpose is to support the caregiving relationship over time. So strengthening relationships, maintaining important caregiving relationships, where the purpose is to support not only the health and well-being of the carer, but also of the person they support. And it's so important, therefore, there is flexibility in how breaks are thought of, but also there is range and choice of short breaks to support a diversity of different circumstances. The definition here was provided by Shared Care Scotland, and it's a really great website with some creative guides and toolkits around short breaks. So I definitely encourage people to have a look at their website and the different toolkits they've developed. Just to be clear about the term carer, so in the research we've been doing, it's been with unpaid, so not professionally trained, not volunteers, so unpaid family members. It was spousal carers who were supporting their partner living with dementia. For a bit of policy background, so throughout all the UK countries, supporting a better access to short breaks is an important political imperative here. But in Wales, we have a strategy for unpaid carers. This strategy, I think, was developed a few years ago, and as a national priority, there is the need to support a life alongside caring through short breaks. And the Welsh Government has invested £9 million to be delivered over 3 years. So this was a 3-year investment from 2022 to 2025. And the aim of the investment was to really increase the capacity of non-profit organisations across Wales to support more carers to have access to breaks. As well as upscaling sort of traditional models, there was also encouragement to think about more creative, innovative, sort of collaborative ways to support better access to breaks. And this priority sits alongside other important areas in terms of identifying carers and providing that timely information and advice and assistance. So together, these priorities, which aren't ranked in importance, but together they're supposed to provide that robust, comprehensive package of support for carers throughout their trajectory of caregiving. So before I talk about why we wanted to explore changing short break needs, I just wanted to highlight some important reports that have come out, and was really through reading these reports formed the aim for this research. So in the last couple of years, there's been some reports looking at the evidence base of short breaks. So what does the evidence tell us about the impact of short breaks on a range of different caregiving outcomes, from health and well-being to resilience to satisfaction in caregiving. So there's a range of important outcomes. And this work by Seddon and colleagues did a scoping review of the international literature. And this highlighted important priority lines for future research, such as thinking about how needs for breaks change and evolve over time as circumstances change. So this could be, for example, how the optimal length of a break changes, or changes in formats or activities. And this fits within broader researchers' priorities within family caregiving. So thinking about which interventions can best support caregivers over time. So through going through these publications, we decided, right, let's focus on a clear priority for future research was better understanding the changing nature of break needs and experience of accessing breaks. And for all caregiving relationships, there is a necessity, obviously, for breaks to evolve to meet those changing circumstances, but particular for maybe more degenerative conditions and chronic conditions such as dementia, where there are changing complex care and support needs, this may influence and motivate different priorities for breaks. So that's what we really wanted to get a better understanding of. I mentioned the term caregiving career, so I thought I would just say a little bit about what I mean by this term. We chose the term as we thought it was quite a nice concept, quite a nice notion to sort of structure how we thought about temporal changes in breaks. The term was originally developed by Anna Selin, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and Perlin, so in the early 1990s. And they followed over 500 families where people were supporting either a parent or a spouse who was living with Alzheimer's disease. And what they noticed was that carers transitioned through different stages of caregiving, and in each stage brought new rewards, new challenges, new stresses, new satisfaction. So it really was a very dynamic, very evolving and developmental process. And caregiving was certainly something that the career was certainly not planned for or expected or easily adjusted to. So there was certainly shifting circumstances over time. And we wanted to use this phrase just to emphasize that it's a very evolving process, and to provide a structure for how we thought about changing break needs. So coming back to the original aim and the study itself. So this is a map of the United Kingdom, and we're here in Wales. So Bang University is up here in North Wales. It's quite a rural area. Sometimes we get a lot of people, families from England coming over and sort of retiring because it's nice. It's quite a nice retirement place to be, and strong Welsh culture, Welsh heritage. Welsh is spoken as a first language by many here in North Wales compared to the south. I had 13 conversations with spousal carers, and we adopted a narrative method. So in terms of the way the interviews were conducted and also the analysis, it followed narrative interviews and narrative analysis. And essentially this was about asking carers to tell me their personal story of caregiving. So they were retrospective interviews, so often going back many years to the start of when they noticed things were changing in their partner, to getting a formal diagnosis. And they shared with me their experience of accessing breaks over different periods of caregiving, and if they were able to access breaks and how easy that was for them. And in terms of the analysis, we charted sort of different caregiving careers, and we looked for those commonalities and those similarities in how breaks were experienced. So a very diverse selection of different caregiving relationships. Most people had been married for very, very long, and they had different caregiving responsibilities. Some people were living with other health conditions, and also carers themselves were living with frailties and complications that come with the natural course of aging. So a huge diversity of relationships. I will share with you now some of our findings around changing short break needs, and I wasn't able to include everything, so the findings I share with you were some of the main points, otherwise it would be talking for over an hour. So this arrow here, this is essentially just the arrow of time, and it's just to indicate the linear progression. I was hesitant to try and pinpoint specific time ranges or periods in which break needs started to change, because people's circumstances were so different and the dementia progressed at different rates. So this arrow here is really just to indicate the passage of time rather than trying to give you specific time periods. Following a formal diagnosis of dementia, so going back to when couples started talking about once they had that diagnosis, which sometimes took many years, depending on how advanced the dementia was at the time. So varying from a few months to sometimes many years, couples did try and their needs for breaks very much reflected their pre-existing routines and habits and preferences. So they did try and keep that sense of normalcy in terms of how they experienced breaks. And for a couple here in their retirement, they enjoyed going on coach holidays together. And this is something they tried to continue doing. And for the carer, it meant not having to drive, not having to cook, and limited responsibilities. Over time, however, there was that gradual decrease in the capacity for the person with dementia, and in terms of cognitive functioning, maybe physical functioning, things started to get a little bit more difficult. And there was that sense of narrowing of activities that they could do together. So from going abroad on holiday became more difficult. Going for long walks became quite difficult, and also maybe going to the shops or going to the cinema, just things became a bit more challenging to organize. And many carers reflected on the fading or the sadness they felt at these lack of activities that they could enjoy with their partner. So their needs for breaks were very much to continue to support their social engagement and the activities that they enjoy, but they relied more on their community, on their friends, and sometimes family. And a carer here was talking about how much she enjoyed going to her local club, which was like a peer support group, because she could talk to other people who knew what she was going through. Often carers were living with their own health conditions, being of an older demographic. And with the increase in caregiving responsibilities, and also with the progression of the dementia itself, many carers over time said they really felt there was a need for longer breaks and more consistent breaks. So having a break just for 2 hours a week or 1 hour a week was just not sufficient anymore. And for 5 couples in the study, 5 couples, yes, all of their partners moved into a care home towards the end of their career. For 4 couples, this was a planned move, although difficult in many ways. It was a prepared move, and for 1 couple, it was because there was a breakdown in the relationship. But the need for breaks very much continued. So the caring role, the caring responsibilities, it didn't stop. It just shifted and evolved, maybe from to providing more emotional support rather than physical care tasks. So a lady here was talking about her husband used to call her continuously throughout the day, and she was constantly providing that reassurance on the phone, and it really was exhausting for her, and therefore she still needed that time for herself to rest and recuperate so she could be there for her husband. Talking briefly around carers' experiences of accessing breaks. So earlier in their career, at the start of the career, their sense of community and what was available in their community was really important, and often communities were a real fertile source of different activities and support, whether this was groups which were more dementia specific or more inclusive groups. Many carers felt these types of community activities were something they could do together. They were affordable, they were consistent, and they provided that important social engagement as well with others. Over time, gradually, there was concerns that they did feel a bit more uncomfortable leaving their partner by themselves at home, or their partner with dementia did express concern if they were gone too long or distress when they weren't around. So in terms of experiencing breaks and accessing breaks, it required a lot more planning, a lot more preparation. It couldn't be as spontaneous as it had been at the start of their career. So a lot more thinking around when they could experience a break. And it was often at this point, maybe a bit too late in their career, but it was often where they did need a lot more practical support and guidance from health and social care professionals to talk through the changes in their circumstances and how they could still embed breaks within their routine. Unfortunately, many people would talk about it was at this point where services were just not available for them, either through lack of staff, lack of money, and there is an eligibility criteria here in the UK where all carers are entitled to an assessment of their needs, but sometimes in terms of accessing different funding or services, you have to meet a certain eligibility criteria. So it's a bit complex, and it's not always as straightforward as we'd hope it would be. Going back to I talked earlier about some of the national priorities for the Welsh Government in terms of making information and assistance and support more available for carers. So there are plenty of websites and charities and who put up a lot of information online about short breaks. We have leaflets and booklets, and that's really fantastic work in reaching a wide audience. But for this older demographic, many carers really struggled to make sense of that information, and sometimes it was a bit overwhelming, and they felt they needed someone to talk through different options and what was available and how they could arrange different services if those were needed. The process often of actually experiencing a break was not always straightforward for some couples in terms of the concept of a break, particularly breaks that were involved separation, were sometimes quite difficult. And there was one carer who said her husband didn't understand her need to have some time apart, and that did cause a lot of tension and conflict and misunderstanding, which was difficult when the carer was already dealing with an array of different responsibilities. So it was not always easy to negotiate in terms of the couple having their break needs met. I wanted to highlight here an example of how short breaks, more regular short breaks, were facilitated. Many of the most popular models were daycare centres, which here in Wales we have different community centres, or sometimes churches or chapels, and they can be really lovely places to go, not sort of institutionalized buildings, but many of the local daycare centres were really a valuable resource, and they had some great activities and offered a range of different types of support for people with dementia. Another example that worked really well in terms of maybe as the dementia progressed and people had a preference to stay at home because it was just easier in terms of mobility, or people felt safer in their own home in an environment that was more familiar, was having a paid carer come into the home. And for this couple, the wife was supposed to go out during that time, but she loved the paid carer's company so much, and they got on so well as a partnership. And it was that rapport, it was that trust, it was that companionship that she actually stayed in, and just talking the three of them together was therapy for her, and that was her break. So there were some wonderful examples where that worked really well for some families. As the dementia progressed, or different, even circumstances in the carer's own life, what was really important, especially towards the latter stages of the career, was for carers to have a full day's rest. And this was where sometimes there was difficulty sleeping if the person with dementia was experiencing very restless nights. The carer would be really exhausted, and many couples expressed a need for a good night's sleep, or at least a full day for themselves. Sometimes if couples had children, they could help, but that was not always the case. And for many families, their children had moved abroad, outside of Wales, had their own careers, or young families. So it wasn't a reliable option always for adult children to support their parents. And there was examples of where the person with dementia just refused to go to daycare or residential care, and that was really difficult for carers to experience a break, because they felt there was just no options for them apart from those two services. A considerable barrier to accessing breaks was the lack of meaningful activities for people with dementia, particularly as the dementia was progressing, where they needed more personalized activities that could support the person's dignity, independence, cognitive stimulation. So if the carer felt there wasn't those activities available in a daycare or residential care, they were really reluctant to try and encourage that option for their partner. So that was a huge barrier for some couples. And challenges around finding highly skilled, trained staff in dementia care who could become part of a team of carers. For example, we had a couple whose the wife needed 24-hour care at home, and the husband had put a team together. And when he had staff who were available, he could have daily breaks where he'd go for a walk or go see his family, but increasingly he struggled to find and recruit staff, so he was getting less breaks when he needed them the most. Short break outcomes. So what we noticed really was, regardless of when in the caregiving career, short breaks, that the outcomes supported through short breaks was really about nurturing what was most important to carers, what mattered most to them at that time in their life. So this could be having solitude, having time for themselves, or it could be time with their partner, just in a different environment with limited responsibility. So it was about tailoring the break experience to what mattered most for carers at that time. Time was really a precious, valued commodity, and it was about where breaks supported carers to have a good length of time without that expectation or without that pressure to be somewhere. That was really important for them to be able to relax physically and psychologically. Carers talked about having increased compassion, so energy to be present in the moment, feeling they were more able to communicate with more empathy. Again, they talked about feeling the importance of the professional carers and that wider support team around them in terms of social workers or health professionals, and whoever was providing that replacement care, the consistency, the respect, the ability of professional carers was so important for the carer and the person with dementia to experience positive outcomes. And I think having the confidence and the security in the quality of care that was provided was so important to provide carers with a psychological break as well, because if they were worried about their partner, even though physically they weren't engaged in any caring tasks, psychologically they couldn't switch off. So it was about understanding both the needs for a physical break and for them emotionally and mentally to relax. So I've whizzed through some of our findings, and I can always go back and answer any questions at the end. But I wanted to highlight what these findings tell us in terms of some key points, just to demonstrate that a variety of short breaks were needed throughout the caregiving career. So breaks of varying lengths, of different intensities of support and involvement from professionals, of different activities. A huge range was needed to support carers over time. Each relationship, each marriage had its own history, its own strengths and weaknesses, which did influence how couples adapted to the experience of dementia, and by extension, how many needs for short breaks and preferences were shaped. So it was really important to think about the wider context of the relationship and understand a bit about the history and the couple together as a unit, rather than just thinking about sort of the present moment. So having that background was really important to understand how a break could be more meaningful. The process of deciding upon a break was really not as straightforward and as simple, and it was always punctuated with many decisions and balancing of what was available, because there was limited resources sometimes. So it was being realistic about what was available. There was compromise. It was balancing the priorities of the person with dementia with the carer's needs. So it took a lot of time, and it was quite an emotional and sometimes relational process that needed to be navigated quite sensitively. Certainly, we noticed a transition from breaks very much starting in the community, quite informal activities, and this could continue for many, many years. But eventually, there was that transition to breaks that needed more support from paid, trained health and social care professionals. it was really in these transitions where delay, either through lack of service or lack of that relevant information and that supported choice from practitioners, did cause difficulties for carers, and that they felt transitions between different breaks became quite fragmented and it wasn't as smooth and as fluid as many couples needed. A subtle shift as well in the priority of breaks from earlier in the career, where many breaks were around supporting that sense of couplehood, supporting time together, going on holiday together, to later in the career where there was greater emphasis on breaks to enable carers to rest, to recuperate more from their increase in responsibilities. And of course, breaks very much continued after, the need for breaks very much continued after the person with dementia moved to a care home. And I think that was a really important finding, because it was often at that point carers emotionally were going through quite difficult times, so they did need that support. I've highlighted 3 policy implications and 3 practice implications. There are many more, but I've just highlighted here 3 to share. So there are temporal changes, there are evolving changes in short break needs and preferences. And I think what this highlighted in terms of what we can do and emphasize in terms of policy is that in the UK, carers are legally entitled to an assessment of their support needs, but they're also entitled to a review of that assessment. And it's so important that supports needs are regularly reassessed, so breaks can be proactively planned for or anticipated, rather than being a very reactive resource. Very much its breaks are too late, too little too late, and they're supposed to be there as a preventative resource. And I think this highlighted the importance of reviewing support needs. There are some statistics that show that very few carers in Wales actually have an assessment, formal assessment of their needs, or even a review. So a lot more work could be done about improving those statistics. The second recommendation chimes with a lot of other publications in terms of support for unpaid carers. And this is about having that consistent practitioner support. So a single expert contact who can be that single point of contact for carers throughout their career. And their role really is to coordinate support alongside many other services, because short breaks are, of course, an important part of a range of different support and resources for carers. So it's about having someone there who can help organise and coordinate all different services and offer that advice and assistance. In North Wales, these roles do exist. So we do have people, professionals who, for example, carers wellbeing officers, carers champions. We have like dementia connectors through the Alzheimer's Society. But how all these professionals work together as part of that post-diagnostic team is really important, because obviously there can be duplication of roles, or there can be people with very similar responsibilities, and that can create extra confusion and duplication of support. And the third point is just to highlight the importance of the health of the social care sector at large, really. In the UK, social care, the National Health Service, quite politicised issues and very complex problems at the moment, which are beyond the scope of this research. But just to highlight, I think the last time I checked, it was 170,000 vacancies in social care, and the lack of qualified and skilled staff is really it really undermines the ability for carers to find those excellent, compassionate professionals who can stay with them throughout their career, particularly in offering replacement care or coming to their house regularly to provide that short break. So until some of the very complex and systemic problems within the social care sector and National Health Service, both sectors are very codependent on each other. Until some of those problems are resolved, I think there will always be a limit on how much we can hope for short breaks to improve. But it's quite a broad point, so maybe I won't talk too much about that because it's beyond the scope. So three practice implications, recommendations, just to highlight that, particularly the carers in this study, because of varying degrees of codependency or varying degrees of different relational dynamics, often carers were not used to and confident about being clear about their short break needs or being clear about what they wanted to achieve from a short break. Even though they needed breaks, they weren't very articulate because of just the overwhelm of their responsibility. So it was recognizing that even with information, even with online resources, they still needed someone to talk to and to work through their understanding of what a short break could provide for them. And this builds upon the second point, is that practitioners who have that wealth of information about the local support in their area or even national support, it's so important that there is that wealth of information there and practitioners do have a good knowledge about what's available. This could be thinking about breaks not just as a service, although these services are really important, particularly for people living with more complex care and support needs. Often breaks could be an activity, it could be an item. So some work in Scotland during the pandemic, Shared Care Scotland reported on the Short Breaks Fund, and this fund actually was used to buy I think a greenhouse for one couple. So during the pandemic, this greenhouse was in the garden and that provided that couple with a break. It was something new for them both. It was meaningful. They were able to go outside. So that for them was their break in their routine. And it's just thinking more creatively and not being limited by what we think a break can be. So that was really important in terms of practitioners being aware of different interpretations and understandings of breaks for different people. Again, highlighting the importance of having someone to legitimize carers' rights for breaks. It was very easy for carers to dismiss their needs, particularly if their partner was worried or hesitant about going to daycare, or even trying out different activities that could potentially provide a break for them both. So it was important there was some encouragement, there was some acknowledgement that this was so important for them. It was important for them to stay healthy, to have that rest so they could provide the care that their partner needed. So that relational support was really important. Okay. So I've talked through some of the main findings and I will go back if there's any questions, but I wanted to highlight having some insight from, I recognize it was only a small population, but having some insight into how carers' break needs evolve through this research, we wanted to think about how we can practically take that knowledge forward and how we can think about the different ways that an evolving understanding of short breaks could be useful for commissioners, could be useful for practitioners, or even carers themselves. And in Wales, we have a publication which is essentially talking about how support in Wales for people with dementia and their families is structured, and how they've talked about this support is structuring it over a journey, so like a pathway, sort of quite similar to the notion of the career. So all support, all learning, or services should be stage appropriate within that journey. And this journey is supposed to be a very seamless, very streamlined process from pre-diagnostic to end-of-life care, I believe. However, having read through this publication, there wasn't a very detailed reference to how many stages characterize this journey and what distinguished a stage, and how people and families were supported as they transitioned through different stages. So what I wanted to do, just as some initial exploratory work, was to conduct a scoping review of the literature to think about what models of dementia caregiving have been published, and if these models explicitly make reference to stages within the caregiving career. So I was interested in models which talked about how carers move through the different parts of caregiving, and most importantly, if these models could offer insight into how short breaks could be tailored to meet those different stages. I think that's important, as short breaks are increasingly talked about as running as a continuum throughout the caregiving career. And if publications are talking about, if policy is talking about the career and journeys as having different stages, it's really important we understand what these stages are, and then use that knowledge to tailor support appropriate to that stage. A definition of a stage was taken from Anna Sellen's work, who came up with the concept of the caregiving career, and it was really used as a heuristic device that helps detect the threads connecting each part of caregiving to its other parts. So I've gone with this definition just to help me identify what a stage could be. Many models were developed in sort of Western cultures and mostly more economically developed countries as well, so Japan, US. And I'll just share with you some of the models that we found, and then actually it would be really interesting at the end to see what your thoughts would be on if you think a framework or a model of stages in caregiving that reflected short breaks that were likely to be appropriate to those different stages would be useful. And this is very initial work, just initial thoughts, which I have tried to write about, but be great to get some feedback if you think this framework would be useful in terms of commissioning breaks, or at least as a guide for practitioners and carers. 3 models were published in the last couple of years. Some stages talked about changes in relationships, so from changes in communication, maybe more emotional, relational changes over time. And other models were very much talking about changes in practical activities. So as carers move through the different stages, they had more practical tasks that they had to adjust to and learn about. Often stages were a mixture of relational changes, practical changes, adjusting from different settings, from caregiving at home to caregiving in care homes or nursing homes. 4 models were published in the early 1990s. Some of you may know of Nolan's work around the multi-dimensional model of caregiving. So this was very important in terms of trying to develop that conceptual model of caregiving, and some stages as well, it's particularly towards the end, were about letting go, a new beginning, resuming life. So it was very much post-caregiving as well, and how carers adjusted to their life towards the end of their career. Anna Sellen's work around the caregiving career, and they had 3 main stages: taking on the caregiving role and all the way through to disengagement of the caregiving role. The earliest model, 1986, so just to, and it's obvious, but there is a huge time time span in which these models were published. So there, you will notice sort of changes in the use of language, and obviously the policy and the practice context has changed a lot. But a number of models again talk about noticing symptoms right at the start of when the dementia was diagnosed, to trying to work through and take on those responsibilities. So what I've tried to do as part of my PhD is write about how the different stages within these models could help us better understand needs for breaks. So that's something I'm still thinking about, something that's still very early work, but hopefully I would like to turn it into a paper, and it would be great to get some feedback as well. So I'm going to stop the presentation. Sorry, I realise I've talked for way too long, and any questions, please ask.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria, for
Okay.
such an incredible presentation. Lots of positive comments in the chat. I have so many things I want to say and ask, but I want to give time to those who are attending. So if anyone has questions or comments for Maria, feel free to post them in the chat or raise your hand and I can call on you and you could unmute. So feel free to raise a hand or post a question. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Anyone want to unmute and share? Raise your hand or just unmute.
This is Charlie Hahn, and I just want to say that was extremely beneficial. I love the statistics. I'm one of those nerds. So thank you for providing so much information.
Thank you.
Great. I want to just one thing that really stood out to me, a lot of this resonates with a lot of the research that I have done, and I did share a link to a new framework that I was privileged to help lead with ARCH and the Committee for Advancing Respite Research on measuring the value of respite care. And in that, we proposed a new model that actually emphasizes that changing needs over time, which I think is something unique that you contribute to the literature that I think we haven't talked enough about, is that tailoring and evolving needs over time. But what I really liked is that emphasis on post, whether you want to call it institutionalized or, you know, when the care is transferred to, the physical care is transferred to someone else, but that need for breaks still continues. I think that's a very recognized, understudied phase in the caregiving journey. And a lot of people are in that where they are, you know, they're therefore not eligible for quote unquote formal respite services because the person isn't in their care physically anymore, but they still need that mental and emotional break. So I really appreciated that, those insights that came from your interviews. So thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, it was more interesting finding, I think, because I wasn't expecting it as well, but I think it's a really important stage where support is definitely needed still.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a question from Gail in the chat, said, did you identify any difference between the cares for parents or spouses?
So the research was with spousal carers. Some of the models that I was talking about, so sorry, my research was with spousal carers, older spousal carers, but my work thinking about the different models of caregiving, and that I think there were many models that talked about not only, you know, spousal relationships, but also adult children and parents as well. So I think the careers are slightly different. The caregiving careers are slightly different in terms of some of the resources adult children have, and maybe their how they work through the career in slightly different ways because the relational dynamics are different. I did read some literature around the subtleties and the differences of the career, so I think that there certainly are, but my research has mainly been with spousal carers. So I couldn't say too much about that, but there are models that which are influenced based on research with both adult children and spouses as well.
Great. Other questions or comments? Again, lots of great comments and resources being shared in the chat. So I just want to highlight those to everyone so that you can see those. We will save the chat comments as well and have those posted with the recording of this, as well as the PowerPoints afterwards, which we'll send to all registered attendees. But any other comments or questions, again, feel free to post in the chat or raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have something you'd like to share.
Yeah, it was frustrating because I couldn't go into too much depth. So I've given a brief overview, but obviously there was a lot more that could be said. But hopefully there's enough there to sort of prompt some interesting thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I kind of made note to just some really great, insights, again, things that I think we all know, but we haven't seen that evidence in the literature on that sort of importance of the need for help to get help. That's a direct quote from a family caregiver that I had in a focus group many years ago, who said, you need help to get help. And that importance of having a care coordinator who can help people recognize and work through those feelings of guilt they may have for asking for a break. And so I really liked and appreciated those recommendations that you shared as well.
Yeah, I think that was really important because information alone isn't always enough to know what to do with, particularly if you've got a lot of other responsibilities and you don't have time. So having someone to talk with was an important process, I think, even if the break wasn't all it was needed to be. I think the process of accessing a break and that support delivered really important process outcomes in feeling they were listened to, feeling they were valued, feeling someone wanted to take the time and be with them and talk about what was important. So
absolutely. Well, we are getting close to our time. So again, thank you. Everyone join me in thanking Maria for this great research, this great presentation. We want to thank you for attending today's webinar again that was co-hosted by the Break Exchange and the Arch National Respite Network and Resource Center. If you are not connected to the Break Exchange, I just posted a link in the chat. Please join us, join our email listserv. It's free. It's a great way to grow your connections and continue to learn about new cutting edge research and evidence-based respite supports around the globe. So thank you so much for your time. And again, we wish you all a wonderful day, and remember to take care of yourself so we can continue to take care of the caregivers we are trying to support. Have a great day.
thank you.